Hello, I'm Louisa Pilbeam. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. So this week, the cost of global natural disasters could run into trillions of dollars a year. But can the damage be prevented? And who will pay when the storms hit? Nowhere is that question more pressing than in Pakistan. The nation is hit again by one of the worst floods in decades, with lives lost and livelihoods washed away. India too is feeling the strain of climate shocks, with farmers and food security on the line. But is government support keeping pace with the scale of the disaster? Global natural disasters are striking harder and more often, with climate emergencies now breaking records year after year. The UN says a child born today faces nearly a 9 in 10 chance of living through a catastrophic flood in their lifetime. The financial toll is staggering, with more than $200 billion a year. That could rise to as much as $2.3 trillion once knock-on effects are counted. But the world's biggest insurers are warning they may no longer be able to cover the costs, while vulnerable communities in poorer nations are left without a safety net. Let's have a look at the scale of the problem globally before turning to Pakistan and India later in the discussion. Financial losses from natural disasters have doubled in the past 2 decades, affecting everything from state budgets to people's livelihoods. Asia has been hit hard. More than 160 disasters were recorded last year alone. That's the highest in any continent, with losses reaching more than $30 billion. Displacement is another issue. About 240 million people were internally displaced by natural disasters between 2014 and 2023. China and the Philippines each had about 40 million people displaced. And in parts of Africa, droughts are posing a growing challenge. An estimated 15 million people are severely affected by the drought in Kenya, Somalia and Ethiopia, deepening food insecurity and a humanitarian crisis. The impact is global, affecting both developing and wealthy nations alike. The recent wildfires in Los Angeles mark the costliest natural disaster this year. Some of the most conservative estimates point to $70 billion to repair that damage. While wildfires and storms account for most of the losses, earthquakes have also caused widespread destruction. Most recently, more than 2,200 people died in Afghanistan after a quake struck the country's northeast. Debris and rubble have made the recovery process daunting. Let's hear from some Afghan people for what they had to say.
Our request to the government, the international community and the people is to help and support us. Our homes have been destroyed and we are living outside under tents. We have no food, no blankets and no shelters.
Even if my house is rebuilt again, it will be destroyed tomorrow. What we need is a proper place to build our homes. The money leaders plan to spend here would be better spent elsewhere, because tomorrow an earthquake or flood will destroy my house again.
Joining us is Alexandre Borde. He is an environmental economist and CEO of Cibola Partners, a consulting firm which supports sustainable climate strategies. And he joins us from Paris. Great to have you on the programme. So we've heard there the eye-watering amounts of money that natural disasters and climate disasters are costing economies around the world. How much of this damage, though, is preventable?
Well, it's important to look at the numbers that you were mentioning. And as you mentioned again in your reportage, these numbers are increasing. So what is extremely important is to try to cover as much as possible all the damages. But it's really challenging, especially in emerging and developing countries where you don't have always the capacity to cover the damages. And that's the challenge of the international community, of the international negotiation on climate finance that are ongoing during different COPs, for instance, in order to first address adaptation, so basically to prevent these climate-related risks, and also then to repair when you have an extreme event, the loss and damages.
But how should the world be preparing?
Well, it's important to, again, invest much more in climate change adaptation. Today, when we look at the numbers, climate finance, it's approximately 1.9 trillion US dollar invested in climate-related aspects. But it's mainly going to mitigation, to renewable energy projects, and so on. It's 97% of this amount that is going to mitigation. And there is the huge imbalance between the investment that is done towards mitigation versus adaptation. Adaptation is 64 billion US dollar going to this. At the same time, when we look at the numbers, we see that the returns by investing in adaptations are high, but somehow we are always reluctant to prevent.
Alexandre, climate change then can be mitigated and prevented, but we're also talking about natural disasters here. In terms of those, they affect wealthy nations as well as developing nations. But are wealthy nations failing poorer economies in terms of the help that they're giving them?
Well, yes, this is, when you look also at the numbers in the details, you were mentioning that, and these are the numbers from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, 2.3 trillion. These are the costs of these extreme events and natural disasters. But most of them can be covered by the private sector and mainly commercial insurance and reinsurance. It's approximately a market of 100 billion worldwide. But it's in effect, 90% of this market is in northern countries. In southern countries, you don't have these coverages, and it's really a challenge, a problem in order to precisely to cover these costs. You have something that is, in fact, very important in that is the remittance from the diaspora. We don't see that a lot in the statistics, but that's probably the main mechanism to cover these costs, and nobody's talking about it.
Okay, something that various people are talking about is international aid and the lack of it in various spheres. Just in the past week, the devastating earthquake in Afghanistan has seen the Red Cross and the UN, for instance, express their need for more financial support. But you have countries like the US withdrawing international aid. How important is that international aid for these natural disasters?
Well, again, the numbers are too low in terms of this solidarity mechanism. Last year, it was US aid for natural disasters. It was about 40 billion USD. Now they stopped, so there is no more funds. The other countries are also involved. The European Union, it's approximately 3 billion. If you add all the EU countries, you come up also to several billions, if not 10 or 15 billions in total. But still, it's far away from what we were saying, 2.3 trillion. So this is here the huge gap that we need to fill, and it's not easy, especially when it's in countries like Afghanistan, where people, the international community is not, there is a lack of attention, of mediatization of these events, and hence this is really problematic. When suddenly you have events that are in front of the news, you will see, that was the case, for instance, with we remember all these natural disasters that it was back 10 or 20 years ago in Thailand, and that hit it also Indonesia, etc., etc. You had a lot of attention from the international community, hence a lot of flow coming in. But when it's hitting Afghanistan, for instance, there is a huge gap between the needs and what's coming in.
Alexandre, we appreciate your time. Alexandre Board, CEO of Cebola Partners, thank you. Now to Pakistan, repeatedly battered by devastating floods. In 2022, a third of the nation was submerged, causing $40 billion of damage and knocking 2.2% off economic growth. Yet donors only pledged $11 billion, and a fraction of that amount has been spent on recovery efforts. This year's deluge has once again laid bare the fragility of Pakistan's economy and infrastructure and the staggering cost of rebuilding. So, if climate-driven disasters are increasing in frequency and intensity, How can Pakistan be better prepared when it is already struggling to stay afloat? Kamal Haider reports from Faisalabad.
Massive floods have submerged more than 500,000 hectares of farmland in Punjab, Pakistan's agricultural heartland and the country's food basket. Agriculture is the backbone of Pakistan's economy and supplies the nation's textile industry. It's also the country's major foreign exchange earner. Last fiscal year, Pakistani textiles earned more than $17 billion in exports, far below the sector's potential. Textile manufacturers complain it's due to the government's economic policies.
Textile ki industry.
Pakistan's textile industry, already struggling with numerous challenges stemming from inconsistent government policies, soaring electricity costs, and heavy taxation, now faces a deeper crisis as floods devastate cotton crops, forcing reliance on costly imports.
Many textile units have closed their shops, while others are barely managing to stay afloat. Back in the marketplace, consumers are spending less to balance their ever-tightening household expenses. Floods could push up prices even further.
It has become increasingly difficult to survive under these circumstances. Every day, we see prices climb higher in the market, further eroding the purchasing power of people like us, who are already struggling with skyrocketing inflation.
The loss of more than 60% of the rice crop, which earned $4 billion last year, is likely to be hit hard. The floods have wiped out standing crops months before the harvest, threatening not only economic losses, but also Pakistan's food security. Farmers are the first victims of the flood, and they're devastated.
The floods have washed away everything, our home, our crops, our livelihood. Now I don't even know how to feed my children or manage daily expenses. We feel abandoned with no help coming from anywhere, not even the government.
Floods are compounding Pakistan's economic woes, with rampant corruption and capital flight that remains unchecked. The country has been living on doleouts from the IMF and under tight conditions. Pakistan is borrowing even more money to pay interest on previous debt. Economic experts warn the economy was already teetering on the brink of collapse. The floods, they say, may be a major setback. Kamal Haider, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost, Faisalabad, Pakistan.
Safia Aftab is an economic policy expert and executive director at Verso Consulting, and she joins us from Islamabad now. Thank you so much for being with us. It's too early at this stage to assess the economic impact, but have you noticed the impact on prices in supermarkets and shops already?
Yes, there's been in general, 10% increase in the price of vegetables, and I have definitely felt it. I've gone shopping and yes, the prices have gone up. Onions, tomatoes, carrots, everyday stuff that we use in our food, prices are up. The prices of fruit are up. And what is another issue that is worrying is that there are potentially shortages on the horizon, because just speaking from personal experience, I went the other day to buy sugar, and the shopkeeper told me that I'm only going to sell you 1 kg, not more than that, because we are anticipating some shortages. There are going to be some supply issues. I don't know whether that was that particular market or whether this is happening generally, but definitely there is an expectation of some shortages in the short term.
How difficult will that be for people, because people are struggling?
Of course, that's going to be very difficult for people. Pakistan's economy has been in the dumps for some years now. The inflation about 2 years ago was 40%. Now it's supposedly down to about 11%, but people have suffered due to the inflationary pressures in the last few years. And inflation going up again is going to be very hard to deal with. So this is not going to be easy for people. According to the World Bank's recent estimates, about 40% of the population is living below the poverty line, according to the World Bank's recent, the poverty line that they've now defined, which is, I think, $3 a day or something. That's a high poverty line, I know, but even translating into purchasing power parity, there is significant proportion of the population which is now living below the poverty line. And high inflation is essentially a tax on the poor.
Monsoon rains in Pakistan are a natural event, and while they are exacerbated by climate change, the resulting floods have happened long enough for the government to be prepared, haven't they?
Yes, I would think so. I mean, the monsoons have been happening for millennia. This is not the first time that floods have occurred. They occur periodically, yes. I think we also have to acknowledge that there have been some policy mistakes. The picture that you're showing just now shows housing society and settlements on what is essentially the path of the river. Maybe not the immediate riverbed, but at least, the surrounding areas of the riverbed. So when you have population explosion and when you allow commerce and, housing societies to commercial buildings and housing societies to be built along the channels of the river, of the different rivers, then, you're asking for trouble.
In terms of housing, about a third of the deaths from this year's monsoon season are from houses collapsing. So why isn't the government, why hasn't it been prepared?
They made something called the 4R framework after the 2022 floods. And I think that was done by the government of Pakistan, the federal government, in collaboration with different donors. The UNDP, the World Bank, I think, was involved. And they made this framework. The 4Rs was supposed to be, I think, resilient, recovery, rehabilitation, reconstruction. It was all very nicely laid out. A lot of that was actually linked to donor funding. And as you said yourself earlier in this report, only about a third of the pledged donor funding came through. Now, there are different reasons for that, and one can go into that. But I think probably it would have been a good idea to adapt the framework itself and to proceed with whatever funds were available. Maybe to some extent that happened. But at some point, when a flood occurs, the flood waters recede, people try to go back and, just help themselves and go back to their regular lives. They don't recoup their losses, but they also don't depend on the government. They just get on with it. Government has to put in long-term measures. We have to realize that with climate change now an undeniable fact, this is going to happen more and more frequently. And you can't always depend on outside assistance. At least for policy reform, you don't need the outside assistance. Things like zoning laws, building regulations, and so on, the government should be able to implement those.
Just briefly, in Pakistan's Punjab region, which borders India, Federal Minister Ahsan Iqbal has accused New Delhi of deliberately releasing excess water from dams without timely warnings. What has been the reaction in Pakistan to that?
To be honest, people haven't really reacted in any big way. I'm not a technical person, so I don't know technically, whether India did the right thing or the wrong thing. What I do know is that India did inform Pakistan that they were going to release the water. They did not go through the Indus Water Treaty channel. They went through diplomatic channels, and I think they presented it as a humanitarian case that, they were basically telling Pakistan that please evacuate people because we have to release the flood water. I don't know technically whether they needed to do that or not. I'm assuming that they did. The problem is that, and we do know that there are floods in India also, and their dams were full to capacity. So I'm assuming that there was no maleficent intention there. The problem is that relations between India and Pakistan are so bad now, particularly after May this year when there was a war, more or less, that, India's intentions are always going to be called into question in Pakistan.
Of course.
And unfortunately, I think there will also be a tendency to blame India, whether that is warranted or not. I'm not sure whether it's warranted or not. But, definitely one can expect that amongst politicians in particular, there will be an attempt to place or part of the blame on the neighboring country. They are the upper riparian state, so, yeah.
Safia Aftab, economic policy expert, we really appreciate your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
India is counting the costs of floods too. Heavy rains have hit the northern Punjab region, which is considered the nation's food basket, particularly hard. The devastation is straining further the agriculture industry, which employs nearly half of the workforce. But the stakes go far beyond the fields to public finances. In the capital, New Delhi, and nearby towns, schools are shut, shelters are overflowing, and roads are underwater, exposing the country's infrastructure and raising concerns about government response to cushion vulnerable communities when such disasters strike. Katia Lopez-Horian reports.
It's the worst flooding to hit northern India in decades. Most farmers in the state of Punjab have lost everything. Their crops submerged in what was once their farmlands. Within days, many lost their homes and livelihoods.
All my crops have been destroyed. They were spread across 30 acres. We are very worried about that.
Punjab state is known as India's breadbasket, with soil ideal for growing grains like wheat and rice. Much of it now has been washed away, with more than 100 villages underwater.
The situation is quite serious. The water level in the streets is up to our knees. There's no arrangement of shelters for us or for our cattle.
Suburban cities have been hit as well, with traffic jams causing major delays in the capital. Heavy rains have exposed poor infrastructure in and around some of New Delhi's neighborhoods. Many of the displaced say they weren't given proper warning.
Usually the water level is very low in our area. When the water began to rise, we got scared. The children were crying. We had to take out our children from there. Little children were crying and asking, what will we do and where will we go? My children's books have been soaked in water. There was no information that so much water would come into our homes.
The floods come at a bad time. India's government, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is under financial and political pressure, faced with widespread tariffs from the U.S. Floods are complicating things even further now for businesses, government leaders, and farmers.
We demand the government give us compensation. A lot of farmers are suffering heavy losses. The paddy crops have been severely damaged. Some people have taken the lands on lease for cultivation. Unless they get the compensation, how will they sow crops for next season?
It will take years to recover what was lost within days, as calls for government accountability grow louder well beyond the affected areas. Katia Lopez-Horian, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Well, joining us now is Devinder Sharma. He is an agricultural and food security expert, and he joins us from Chandigarh in the Punjab region of India. Thank you so much for being with us. So, Pakistan has accused New Delhi of deliberately releasing excess water from dams without timely warnings. And I was just speaking to our guest based in Pakistan, who said that relations are so strained that there will always be suspicion over this. Do you agree?
Well, that is true that the relationship between India and Pakistan is so severe now. And so obviously there is a blame game taking place. But whether India did it deliberately or not is a question that would come out later. But yes, the natural flow is towards Pakistan. And often, India has diplomatically used the channels to tell Pakistan that they're going to release water. But nevertheless, the rains here have been too heavy, as a result of which, as you already mentioned, the flooding area is huge, and about 400,000 acres of the standing paddy crop and the cotton crop are submerged with water. And given this condition, when the area has expanded over the last couple of days, as far as floods are concerned, I think there has to be some mechanism by way of which we can ensure that in the future we don't see such a recurring floods happening.
Indian farmers, though, have criticised the government for saying that they should have been aware, they should have been alerted, because the government was aware for months of these weather forecasts. In terms of emergency responses and warnings, why hasn't Modi's government done more?
you are very right. And farmers had not only been talking to the government, but they had also moved a petition to the government that sometimes in the month of June and July, asking the government to be ready for the likelihood of floods happening. But whatever the reason, I think it was a maladministration or some gaps left that the government didn't react in the manner that they should have. And so therefore we see a kind of a demand for also being raised that the dams should also be questioned as to the timing of the release of water, and also ensuring that or also failure to ensure that the time when the rains were less, the siltation process could have been taken up so that we have more capacity in the reservoirs. But that didn't happen, and so there is a debate going on in the country that whether the dam should be held responsible or should be held accountable. That debate is happening, but at the same time, the dams have responded saying that they have taken adequate precautions, and there may be some gaps left in the state government's effort to clean up the canals and clean up the rivulets and so on. And but whatever be the reasons, I think if you see it collectively, there has been a failure as far as the preparation was concerned.
So a failure, what kind of relief then is the government providing? Any kind of compensation are the farmers receiving?
Well, as I said, the Prime Minister has announced a relief package of 16,000 million Indian rupees. And as I said earlier, the opposition parties are saying this is not adequate, this is just a cruel joke, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, the government had risen to this point, and they are saying that we will be standing with the farmers in the months to come. Why I'm saying this is because the standing crop in 400,000 acres is gone because of the submergence, but also there is a question mark over the next crop, which starts sowing period would be from October, and that is also gone. That's a wheat crop, because the farmers have to clear the fields now because it is silted, and unless the desilting process is undertaken, I don't think the fields can be ready by December. So not only the paddy crop in the Kharif season, but in the next season, the Rabi crop, I think, would also suffer as a result of this.
Of course, such a huge recovery operation. Devinder Sharma, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That is our show for this week. Do get in touch with us on X. I'm at Louisa Pilbeam TV, and use the hashtag AJCTC when you do that. Or drop us an email. countingthecosts@aljazeera.net is our address. There's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC, and that will take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. That is it for our edition of Counting the Costs. I'm Louisa Pilbeam from the whole team. Thank you for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is up next.